the mealy-mouthed, middle-of-the-road posture taken by Dana Milbank of the Washington Post is an example of the kind of punditry that lacks any kind of substance or any real analysis regarding the 2016 presidential race in either party. In this case, the focus is the Democrats. Dana Milbank on January the 27th, 2016, wrote an opinion piece. I can't stand that word. But Dana Milbank did an opinion story about, in his words, Democrats being insane if they were to nominate Bernie Sanders. And what I got from that column was a lot of fear, hysteria, mealy-mouthed compromising, and shilling, more on the part of the Republicans actually than even on the part of Hillary Clinton. And the thing about Milbank's story, if you read it in the Washington Post, is that it's very, very lightweight. There's nothing substantive there at all. He doesn't really outline any reasons beyond the obvious reactionary ones as to why Bernie Sanders would be a irrational or insane choice. He ignores history. He ignores the fact that progressivism is a huge movement in the United States and always has been for probably more than 100 or 200 years, as a matter of fact. This whole country, particularly after the end of the Civil War and after the Emancipation Proclamation, was all about progressivism. It was all about trying to move in the direction of justice and equality and human rights for people. Movements around this whole entire country over a more than 200-year period, the country was known as the U.S., was built around progressivism. And there was a Republican as in the early part of the last century named Teddy Roosevelt who had a progressive agenda and was one of the most progressive Republicans that there has been. And if you're going to launch attacks on Bernie Sanders, the thing is worth looking at the reality that there are a bit more than just a few blobs of opinionating to go around. The reality is that the United States of America, for many, many decades now, has been a place where progressive, and I like to use that word more so than liberal, because that word to me is not really the accurate descriptor. Progressivism has always driven America, even when there has been such harsh, conservative, right-wing agendas that are being put through government, such as with people like Woodrow Wilson in the early 1900s, such as with people like Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, such as with people like George W. Bush in the 2000s. These three presidents had some pretty darn harsh conservative right-wing agendas. And with Bush number 2, W, as he's called, President 43, it was the foreign policy aspect that was very much very far-right neocon that has wrecked this world, destroyed it, destroyed the Middle East, destroyed Iraq, invading and illegally invading a country that had never done anything to the United States. With Reagan, it was what he did, not just economically, but infrastructurally, and what he did to unions, eviscerating unions. The whole thing with the air traffic controller strike, and what he did there, firing all the air traffic controllers. One of the first of many moves that helped to substantially eviscerate unions in America. The corporatocracy and what Reagan did to allow that to proliferate, deregulation of Wall Street. And even though he put in jail more bankers than Bush has ever done, or than Obama even has ever done, or than Bill Clinton even has ever done, the fact of the matter is that Reagan was the one who was primarily and singularly responsible for the kind of devastating economic crises we find ourselves in. And it's not that he was directly involved, but the policies and the agendas and the people around him and beneath him helped to really undermine the protections against overreach by Wall Street, against greed. You had the financial crash in 1987 as evidence of that, and the stock market plummeted. At that time, it was the biggest drop ever since the Depression, if not the biggest drop of all time, back in 87. It was known as Black Monday because it was a Monday in October in 1987 where that happened. And the deregulation movement really thrived through Ronald Reagan. And that movement helped to destroy not only the financial infrastructure of America, but also to put a lot of Americans out of work. Not only that, housing decimated, housing market decimated, people becoming homeless, more mentally ill on the streets. Reagan actually released a lot of mentally ill from places of care onto the streets of America, and the mentally ill population proliferated. Homeless vets, the AIDS crisis, all of these things under Ronald Reagan for 8 years in the 1980s. And Bush 1 continued that. Bush 1 was the guy who consolidated, if you will, the kinds of things that really decimated America under Reagan. Corporations were able to act with reckless abandon, and still are. And that is the case to this day. And Reagan ran a very duplicitous campaign, in a way, because it was morning in America, but at the same time, he was giving waivers to American companies to buy from overseas countries, to invest in workers from overseas countries, to buy through trade agreements with other countries, like the Chinese, like China, for example. And China now, in 2016, is the biggest threat, if you will, threat in quotes, to American business in terms of what the U.S. can do. The U.S. doesn't make anything. It doesn't export anything except for weaponry, except for films, movies, Hollywood. That's pretty much the only two things that America does anymore. Exports movies, makes movies, exports movies through Hollywood system to people around the world. And weaponry, defense. Those are the two things. You can't name me, I guarantee, anything else that Americans, that the United States makes. Cars, yeah, well, there's still some car plants. Obama helped to preserve them and did preserve them. in his first term, and those are being made, but there's no competition because the Japanese are still the strongest, along with the Germans, when it comes to cars and manufacturing of cars. Lots of plants have shut down in the US, and they began shutting down in the US under Reagan. Flint, Michigan, which was really strong even in the 80s, has now been decimated through Reagan policies, Reaganomics as it's called. And now, with the Flint water crisis, another Republican, this time the governor of Michigan, has helped to continue to seal Michigan's fate. Detroit bankruptcy over the last few years. And yes, there was a Democratic mayor involved and he went to jail. And he should have gone to jail, but he was just part of the problem. There was a whole infrastructure that preceded him, that was around him, that also should have been indicted, if you will. But that's just a brief history. It's a very incomplete history. And my larger point is that progressivism has always been something that the American populace has wanted and has asked for and has advocated and historically has done. Whether it's Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster, the antitrust president, who was a Republican and a progressive, he was against the proliferation of corporations. That's a Republican at the turn of the century, of the 20th century. A president who was against that. You know? And people need to, Americans specifically, need to learn the history of the country. And they need to learn what the dynamic is. You can go to FDR. FDR in the 1930s, in the 1920s, late 20s after the Depression, and into the 1930s, when America was falling apart. The Great Depression, millions of people out of work, millions and millions of people out of work. It was such a bad time in this country. And FDR came along, and there was the New Deal, where he put a lot of bold things into action. And this isn't about Congress, and this isn't about obstructionism. And people say, well, times are different now. Well, of course, times are different. But that doesn't mean that the effort to put forth and implement a bold agenda should not be sought and should not be tried. And, I wholeheartedly reject that kind of thinking. And that thinking to me is really, truly conservative thinking. And there are people who are Democrats who are espousing that type of thinking now when they're supporting Hillary Clinton. Not every Democrat is doing that, but some of the Democrats that I've seen, that I'm aware of, do that. They are espousing that type of thinking that says that, the reason why Bernie's going to be a failure is he can't win, and B, Congress won't allow him to. And not only that, it's just what he's proposing is just ridiculous and pie in the sky. It can't work. Why is there a rush to poo-poo Bernie Sanders? If you're saying that he can't win because you honestly believe he can't win, then fine. That's your opinion. My opinion is he can win. And as long as he is in the race, he has a chance. He has a chance to win. But if you're saying Bernie Sanders can't win because you don't want him to win, and you are supporting another candidate, then say so. That's fine too. But say so. I think sometimes what happens is that the argument gets made as if just saying that he can't win means it's so. He can't win if he's 6 years old, because you have to be at least 35 years of age in America and have to be born in the United States of America to run for president. That's part of our Constitution. That's one of our amendments in the Constitution that says you must be 35 years of age at least. and born in the United States. So he can win because he fits the requirement and because he has a message that absolutely does appeal to this country's long-standing progressive tradition. FDR brought us Medicare, which millions of Americans hold on to, rely upon. It is a lifeline. Is it perfect? No. But it has been the bedrock of this country for many, many decades. And nobody had tried to improve it with any success until President Obama did in 2010. Granted, he had the Congress, fine. But even when he didn't have the Congress that he wanted, Medicare and Medicaid and Obamacare, as it's called, were challenged, but still prevailed. Still prevailed. The Affordable Care Act prevailed. Still has. Even with a Republican House and Senate, it has. Supreme Court upheld the provisions in it. It's prevailed with all the attacks, the 50, 60, 70 times that the small-minded people in the Republican Party voted to try to repeal it. It survived. Of course, it's going to be met. It was met with a big fat veto by Obama. So it survived to all of those people, Democrats, who say, well, it's a different Congress now. Well, how come it survived? Well, obviously we have a president who's democratic. Clearly, that's the biggest reason. But this idea that we shouldn't aspire to something greater and we should only go incrementally after all the things that have happened in the last 8 years, people losing their homes in the financial crisis, people being shot to death who are unarmed, minding their own business, being shot to death by police, jobs being shipped overseas, some more still under Obama, corporations and billionaires prospering under Obama, unlike any other previous president in history. We had the Citizens United decision under Obama. We've had the Guantanamo Bay prison where people are tortured and interrogated still open. I mean, people have to look at this. Obama, I think, is one of the top 5 or 6 presidents of all time. And even with the obstructionism, he has done a remarkable job. But I also think he could have done more with obstruction or no obstruction. And saying so does not mean that now I'm against Obama. That's ridiculous. And I think some of the people, some, not all, some of the people who are supporting Hillary Clinton are now running to Obama's defense. Don't forget now, some of these very same people who support Hillary Clinton now did so in 2008 when some of the group of people who supported Hillary Clinton in that year, 8 years ago, vowed never to vote for Obama. Never. The kind of venom that some of the Hillary Clinton supporters had for Barack Obama when it was clear that he was going to win the nomination was absolutely legendary. Some of it was quite racist too, and some of that tone was set in the South Carolina primary by Bill Clinton. And granted, there are some Bernie Sanders supporters right now who are absolutely out of their minds with the venom and the hatred for Hillary. We don't need any of that here. None of that. Bernie Sanders supporters have to, those supporters, not all of them do this, but that group of supporters on the Bernie side who are lobbying attacks at Hillary do not help their cause, do not help Bernie's cause. And any Hillary Clinton supporters, those groups of supporters on Hillary's side who are lobbying attacks at Bernie, also do not help their cause. They don't help Hillary's cause either. Because what happens is that whomever wins, if the other party who lost has been lobbed grenades at by the winning party for the Democratic nomination, some of those people will decide not to vote for the winner, which actually to me is a form of political suicide, because then you invite the GOP person to come in and wipe the floor with whomever they want to wipe it with, whoever's in. But that won't happen. And I think these times call for a candidate on the Democratic side, a nominee who is really going to upset the apple cart and lay waste to the complacency and the incrementalism of conservatives, as I call them, the conservative Democrats. Because the Democratic Party now has gone rightward. Increasingly over the last 35 years, the Democratic Party has gone ever rightward. It has moved far to the right now. I'm not saying it's a radical party because it's not, but the Democratic Party has changed dramatically over the last, I'd say, over the last 50 years. Now, I understand that Democratic parties and Republican Party, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party change. They have, because of course, you know that in the 1800s, Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, was in the party that was against, or at least had advocates against, the enslavement of black people in this country. And the Democratic Party in that era was the party of resistance, the party that didn't mind at all and that wanted to preserve the enslavement of African people, of black people in America. So we understand there is a cyclical change over generations, over decades, and that change soon began just before or just after Reconstruction. So that before, just at the turn of the century into the early 20th century, you then had this really different definition of what Republican and Democrat was. And Republican then began to take on a very different form just after the early 1900s. So that by the time we got to the 1930s and 40s, it started to become very different. Right around just after rather, Teddy Roosevelt. And then you found that in the 1960s, of course, the party really began to change. Nixonian party. LBJ and the Democrats in the South, and LBJ in 64 signing the Civil Rights Act in July of 64. There goes the South. And what he meant was there goes the white South, because the South voted reliably Democratic for a number of decades, reliably Democratic in the 20th century. But it wasn't until the 60s, the early 60s after LBJ, mid 60s after LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act and then the Voting Rights Act in 1965, the following year, that you had this kind of white flight, if you will, from the Democratic Party in the South to the Republican Party in the South. White flight. White Southerners basically self-evicted from the Democratic Party and joined the Republican Party and have been a reliable voting bloc. Many white Southerners, not every one of them, but have been a reliable voting bloc for the Republicans ever since. Still are. The Deep South. If you look at the Deep South today, you will see the Bible Belt is overwhelmingly white Southern Republican. It's overwhelmingly so. South Carolina, you can look at Texas, although Texas is changing a little bit. You can look at Alabama. You can look at Tennessee, Kentucky. Louisiana, Mississippi. I mean, you can go on and on and on. But that's the history. So there are shifts. And again, progressivism continued with FDR on the Democratic side. And the New Deal, as I was talking about. And about jobs programs trying to reinvigorate America after the Great Depression. And FDR served 4 terms and didn't finish his fourth, pretty much, quite frankly. He died in office, was ill. And he put together a 10-point program and talked about the kinds of things that America had to do and had to aspire to. And some of that got implemented, including Medicare. That was the progressive agenda. Now, FDR was not perfect. He did things that were reprehensible, in specifically and singularly interning Japanese Americans. That was hardly progressive. That was one of the biggest stains of his presidency. And of course, during his time in office, the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The U.S. dropped the atomic bomb on both of those cities in Japan. So that was during, or just around, if not just during his presidency, but slightly after it. It was certainly in that era of FDR. So every president has positives and minuses, and God knows that was a minus, as was the interning of hundreds of thousands of of Japanese Americans in the mid to late 1940s and into the 50s, late 1940s during WW2, World War II. My point is that the progressive agenda has always been around in this country, and that people, by and large, when push comes to shove, Republican or Democrat, champions change that will make their lives better. It is only the rich and the conservative of this country who don't want large-scale changes. And you can't just find conservatives in the Republican Party. I'm talking about small c conservatives. You can find conservatives in the Democratic Party. And there are people who are Democrats who are conservative. The word conservative does not have a GOP label explicitly and exclusively. Conservative also applies anywhere, across the board. Across the board. And that means also there are Democrats who are conservative. They may vote Democratic, but their ideology, or at least their way of thinking, is conservative. And incrementalism is what that type of Democrat argues for. And progressivism has continued since FDR. And you've got this incrementalism that has also started and has continued on the part of people who are conservative. And there are people like FDR, people like JFK, although JFK was less a progressive than FDR was in many ways, and in fact, less a progressive in many ways than LBJ was, although LBJ was pushed, as a lot of people in office are pushed, by the forces of the political activists outside the system, who push an FDR, who push, specifically in LBJ's case, push an LBJ. You had activists, black folk in the civil rights movement who pushed him and pushed him. And as a result, they made his legacy an enduring one. He became one of the most consequential presidents of the 21st century, one of the most consequential presidents ever. FDR did as well. And both of those presidents did things that weren't liked. Certainly, the Gulf of Tonkin incident under LBJ was a huge one. Huge one. Absolutely enormous. That is what led us into the Vietnam War. It was a lie that LBJ told live on national television that got us into a war in Vietnam, a war again that we lost. Just like the one that Bush waged, some 40 or so years later, almost 40 years after. And that Gulf of Tonkin incident did more to decimate LBJ and America at the time than pretty much anything else over the previous decade or so, prior to the 1960s. Obviously, another thing that decimated America in that very same decade was the kind of injustice and the kind of terrorist attacks visited on Americans, specifically visited on African Americans. So there were lots of ebbs and flows, lots of them. And LBJ stepped into the breach and ended up being a very consequential president as a result of progressives who sought change, who forced change. That is the American tradition. It's been the American tradition since the American Revolution. Americans want change. Americans fought and died for change. Look at the American Revolution. I mean, if that's not if that's not an example of progressivism and being progressive, I don't know what is. Overthrowing the British? I mean, if that's not a staple of what progressivism is, I don't know what is. So I think you've got to look at history, and obviously pundits don't do that, Dana Milbank. They put out some of them, not all, some of them, especially those who write for establishment, mainstream media newspapers like the Washington Post, are very shallow. They don't have the historical analysis. I said some, not all. The whole thing with the enslavement of Americans, enslavement of black folk in America, and the progressive movement, the anti-slavery movement, the anti-enslavement movement, the abolitionist movement, confronted enslavement and fought against it, fought to end enslavement of black people in America. Now, if that's not a progressive movement, I don't know what is. The women's movement, the suffragettes, the suffrage movement, the 1920s and before, women fighting for the right to vote in America. Women didn't get the right to vote in America until the 1920s, until 1920. That's less than 100 years ago. That didn't happen with people asking for incremental change. That didn't happen with anybody asking for, well, we'll just build upon the little crumbs or the platform that someone else has set previously. That's not how America evolved and developed and grew and changed and molded and shaped. Women fought and died. Suffragettes, the suffrage movement in this country was not built upon incrementalism. Women fought, died, declared, and won and pushed for the right to vote in America in 1920. And their platform was not incrementalism. Their platform was not, oh, well, it's crazy. It's crazy to think that we can get the right to vote. It will never happen. That was not their platform. Their platform was not step by step, let's take it easy, let's change a little bit, let's just build on what's happened. Their platform was, we're going to bust this damn door down and we're going to get the right to vote. And we're going to do that. We make up 51% of the population, and this movement is a movement that will benefit America. And because women are America, women are the future, women are the present, women are the past, women are humanity. And we are going to get the right to vote, and we're going to do whatever we have to do to revolt and get the job done so that we have the human rights and we have our rights recognized and we have them exercised and we get to exercise the franchise. That was not some kind of pie in the sky idea. It wasn't. That was about progressivism. You can't tell me that the suffrage movement and the suffragettes were some kind of incremental movement. That was a steady, persistent, and highly focused, determined group. And a movement that was full on. America has always been a progressive nation. Don't buy into this red state, blue state nonsense. It's a way that the mainstream media has always been able to get people talking in that kind of really foolish language and quite frankly divisive language. Yes, are there more states that are more conservative than others in terms of their thinking and in terms of their laws? Of course, yes. Are there some states that are more, I would say, quote unquote, liberal than others in terms of some of the laws? Yes, of course. But that doesn't make them red states and blue states. That's just a really simplistic way of looking at this. Again, America is always and has always been a progressive nation. Ignore these politicians who say, oh, America is a conservative country. No, it's not. Are there lots of conservatives in the media? Yes. Does conservative media proliferate America? Yes. Is the mainstream media at large more right-wing and more corporate? Yes. And does that skew more to the GOP and conservatives? Yes. But as for the people of the country, the people, the majority of this country, if you ask them privately, push comes to shove, they believe in healthcare. They believe in having an ambulance show up to your door, having the fire show up to your door. You don't have to pay for that first before they show up to put out your burning house or your burning apartment. Put out that fire. That's what socialism is. Those are socialist services. The fire, ambulance, public libraries. I mean, I know people say public libraries are pretty much extinct, but they're still around. There's still libraries around in every city in America. I just, people have to really look. If you're going to Dana Milbank, put out pieces like yours, and you're free to criticize Bernie all you want. You're free to criticize Hillary all you want. But if you're going to put out an op-ed and make these really flimsy, reactionary charges and sentiments about Bernie in particular, because that's really who you aimed at. I know you tossed a soft grenade at Hillary. She's dreary. She's this. She's that. Real stupid. And I'm a Bernie supporter. And I think those attacks on Hillary were absolutely ridiculous. Those are stupid. What you were saying about Hillary in your piece was absolutely ridiculous. Her campaign doesn't have the enthusiasm, I think, for two reasons. One, Clinton and the Clintonians have been around for a long, long time. And it's not even just a question of Clinton fatigue. It's a question of the fact is that there is a perception by some is that she's had her turn, so to speak. She's had her chance, so to speak. I don't agree with that, by the way, but there is a perception among some people that she's been around for a long time and represents the establishment, which she actually does, and I do believe that, and it's true. You know, she's a centrist. I can't stand that term because I think it's a wimpy term. It doesn't really mean anything. I think the honest term is that she's a conservative Democrat who takes money from Wall Street, who makes millions of dollars on speeches from Wall Street. She got money from Goldman Sachs and all kinds of places on Wall Street to give speeches there. She's on the side of the corporations. She sits on the board of Walmart, for goodness sakes, and Walmart's done more damage to the American worker than a whole lot of other people have. She's taken money from the prison industry. She had supported the death penalty in the year 2008. I don't know where her position is on that now. She hasn't said, and no one's held her feet to the fire. No one in this so-called liberal media has asked her about that in any of these debates. And the media is not liberal at all, is my point. Nor is it progressive. It's right-wing, including MSNBC. But that's a whole nother story. My point is that Hillary Clinton had for a long time supported the Keystone Pipeline and then changed her mind and then decided, and she's entitled to change her mind, but it just shows you the idea is that she's disingenuous about her positions. And that's what some people, including myself, have a problem with Hillary Clinton. I think she's an excellent politician, and if she does win the nomination, you can bet I will back her and I will work for her. No question about it. But right now, we are in the primary season. And right now, we have to vote for who is available and who is the best Democrat. For those of you who are listening to this who are Democrats, who has a chance to be in the White House in January of 2017. And Hillary's position on TPP was very sketchy. It took her a year to get to the TPP position of not supporting it. It took her a year. In fact, she had supported it for a long time. A long time she supported TPP. And I thought she still has supported it even now, but I think she hasn't, or at least decided to come out against it now. But TPP, which Obama, by the way, supports, is responsible for eviscerating millions of American jobs. Those jobs go overseas, and American corporations who've already been taking jobs from this country to overseas will continue to do so tenfold under TPP. And I'm telling you, that's going to pass and that's going to be finalized. And you will really start to see the evisceration of the American workforce through a lot of these American corporations, these multinationals. Walmart, again, a company on which Hillary sits on its board, has been hemorrhaging jobs like crazy, even under the Obama administration. Like crazy. You can go look this up. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to believe what I'm saying. You can go and look it up. It's there. There was a recent announcement about Walmart shutting down some stores. There was a recent announcement about Macy's shutting down lots of stores and laying off hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of workers, thousands of workers across the country. I'm telling you, this is happening. And it doesn't get talked about. It might be cruel on the bottom of a television's news station, but it's there. Instead of people blaming immigrants for taking American jobs, and just the biggest lie that any GOP politician or candidate can give you, can spoon feed you, can make you scared of or make you fear with, instead of listening to that nonsense, that garbage, go and Google for 3 seconds and you will find layoffs. If you put together Macy's layoffs and put the word layoff after any American corporation that you can think of, you will see the staggering amount of news stories talking about job losses, talking about jobs being cut, layoffs being done. I'm telling you, all you have to do is do a Google search. That's all you have to do. President Obama has done a remarkable job. There are some great gains that he has made for America. And I had some issue with him. I voted for him twice. I had issues with him. I had issues with him before I voted for him. But for the most part, I think he's been excellent as a president. I think he could have done more than he's done. I disagree with him on TPP. I disagree with him on Guantanamo. I disagree with him on what he's done, even with my brother's keeper, which I think is not strong enough. And I don't think the focus should be the people who are being constantly killed by police, in terms of it's them. They're not getting opportunities, so therefore it's them. They have to kind of stem the violence. And I know that violence and gun violence among African American youth is a real problem in a lot of cities. That should be addressed. I don't think my brother's keeper goes far enough to giving those young men in that community, in those communities, the opportunities they should be getting. I don't. That doesn't mean he shouldn't do it. I support my brother's keeper. I just think it should go further than he has done. And I dare say to you, I submit to you, that that is even incrementalist. But there's no question that Obama is, and I think history will regard him as, in time, a consequential president, particularly for healthcare and for the Affordable Care Act, most notably. He preserved two wars, so I have a disagreement with him there. For sure I do. You're darn right I have a problem with that. He preserved those wars. Now, he didn't vote for them, and he said he wouldn't vote for them when he was running 8 years ago, but he preserved them as president. He did. He preserved them. So he preserved Bush's wars. So you've got to look at this honestly and objectively and rationally. He preserved those wars. So that doesn't make him any better, in my eyes. Doesn't. And as I said, incrementalism isn't good enough. The Affordable Care Act, tremendous, but it could go further. There are still pharmaceutical companies who benefit greatly, insurers who benefit greatly from this. And there are still people in this country who are still, despite the ACA, aka Obamacare, are still paying through the nose. So again, it's incremental change. And people are going to tell me, well, change never comes all at once. Well, maybe, maybe not. But I think our aspirations have to be higher. And that's something that I've been talking about a lot on social media, on Twitter specifically. I think our aspirations need to be higher. Much higher, actually. And this kind of conservadem approach, this kind of blue dog approach, let's just consolidate, let's just keep it. No. America needs more than that. America can do more than that. And under RFK, Robert Kennedy, who never became president, was tragically assassinated in June of '68 as he was running for president, and he was in California when he was assassinated. RFK said, some, and I'm going to paraphrase it, some men see something and say why, others say it and say why not. See it and say why not. In other words, he was looking at going beyond what we're accustomed to, going beyond the status quo, going beyond the static response of, well, it can't be done, and turning instead to, why not? Why can't it be done? And that question, for me, is my question to some, or to the Hillary Clinton supporters, is why can't it be done? Why can't Bernie Sanders execute that vision? And I know one of the answers is going to be, well, because we have a Congress that's all Republican. I want people who may give that kind of response something to think about. I want them to think about something. I want them to think about the idea that perhaps it's not exactly as you may think it is. And that perhaps it may be that this is not just about Bernie Sanders, that it's about the movement around him and the people who have to get out and vote in the midterms on the Democratic side so that we can actually bring about the changes that he's looking at, and that on election day this year in November, that people vote down ballot as well for Democrats who are going to vote for Bernie, and then go all the way down the line and vote for Democrats in state and local races, so that you can populate that Congress with those people that represent your interests, even if they are blue dog Democrats. Put them in, vote them in, vote them in. That's the challenge. That is the challenge, folks. I love Hillary Clinton. She's an excellent politician. But I think if she had run her campaign with a bolder change initiative, something that tipped a hat to Obama, but then pushed on with a huge, sweeping Clintonian, and I mean Clintonian 2.0, and I mean different from her husband. I'm talking about a bolder, more progressive vision for America. She would not be in the dogfight of her life right now with Bernie Sanders. She wouldn't be. I'm telling you now. And this is something that I have said forever, not about Hillary, but about Democrats in general. The new Democratic mentality over the last 25 years, in my opinion, has been to just do just enough to get by. And that's not good enough. While the Republicans hammer away with fear, 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 hate, 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 selfish, 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 money, 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 the Democrats over the last 25, 30 years have been just enough to get by. We'll just incrementalize and just do a little bit to get by. That's what happened when Hillary voted on the Iraq War. She voted for that. And Democrats have voted for that. Not just Hillary Clinton. There are lots of Democrats that voted for that war. A lot of them. A lot of them. Joe Biden voted for it. The current vice president, he voted for it. Dianne Feinstein, Blue Dog Democrat, she voted for it. I mean, there are others, but those are the ones that immediately come to mind. I think Pat Leahy did also. Democrat. Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken. Pat Leahy, he voted for it. I'll tell you who didn't vote for it. Russ Feingold didn't. I believe he was a senator then in Wisconsin. He didn't vote for it. And if he wasn't in, the guy who, Herb Kohl, if Herb Kohl was still in, and I think he may have been, he did vote for it. But if he wasn't in, I don't remember. I believe Russ Feingold was in the Senate, and he was. He was in the Senate in 2002, when they had that October 2002 vote, scheduling it, of course, around a month before the campaigns of their campaigns, so that they knew what they had to go back to the voters with. Yeah, people are not stupid when they do these things. It's very clear. I tell you who else didn't vote for it. Lincoln Chafee, a Republican. He didn't vote for it. He did not vote for the invasion of Iraq. Okay? He didn't. And those are some of the people I can think of off the top of my head. But this kind of conservative approach is not going to be the winning margin. When Democrats try to run like Republicans, believe me, the voters vote against them every time. Someone said this, I believe it was James Carville, or whomever said this. whenever Democrats try to be Republicans, I forgot who said this, if there is a choice for voters between Democrats who behave like Republicans and Republicans, they'll vote for the Republican every time. And that's true. Case in point, just 2 years ago, 2014. And I always pointed this. And she's not the only one, but there are others. But my favorite one is Allison Lundigan Grimes, out of Kentucky, Democrat, running for the seat that Mitch McConnell occupies in the Senate. The Republican, Mitch McConnell, Kentucky son, if you will. The guy who had been senator for, a number of years now, decades, a long time, McConnell, 20 plus years or so, maybe even close to 30. And a reporter had asked Allison Lundigan Grimes who she voted for in the last two presidential elections, 2008, 2012. She wouldn't give the answer. And clearly she voted for Obama, but she wouldn't say. She didn't want to come across to voters in Kentucky as someone who was a liberal, a progressive. And Obama, to me, was not even a progressive when he was in office. Now, there were some progressive things that happened, and I'm not going to ever diminish that legacy. I think he's an excellent president. I just think he could have done more. I voted for him twice. I've criticized him many times, before, during, and I will after his presidency, about what his record was. And I think he will be consequential with the ACA to a degree, and with other things that have happened, especially for marriage equality. For sure. Can't deny that. Can't deny it. But again, there is that kind of change because he ran as a progressive in his campaign. But then when he governed, he didn't govern as a progressive for the most part. He really didn't. It's a complete misnomer that he did. And I think people who argue that he did have to look at his record. Look at his record. And look honestly at it. Not what the media says. Look at his record. He ran, and I'm telling you, he ran as a progressive and governed more to the center. And obviously you have to do a degree of compromising, but, you can run boldly. And then you can govern boldly, like Teddy Roosevelt did. And fiercely against corporate dominance. Speak softly and carry a big stick. He wielded power against corporations in the early part of the 20th century. Antitrust. He led that. Trustbuster. That was Teddy Roosevelt. Republican. In office. Not just running for president, but in office. And I get it. The executive branch doesn't have the power that Congress has. But, you know what? If voters do what they have to do and stop falling in love with reality TV candidates and stop falling in love with reality TV and decide to actually vote in off-year elections and come out in large numbers and do so and not cede midterm elections to the GOP voter, the predominantly older white voter who knows what it's about, who is savvy enough to make the vote count and come out in lower turnout, but they come out more often than the Democrats do, yeah, then you're gonna, if you don't cede that, then you'll see some change. Then you'll see a Congress that looks more like how you want it to look, so that your interests will be fought for or at least advocated for, so that we won't have to worry about Roe versus Wade being overturned, or we won't have to worry about challenges to Obamacare, so that we won't have to worry about the Supreme Court being completely conservative. These elections mean everything. Not only the election in November, but also the off-year ones. And I'm saying all of this because this is the kind of thing that people are going to have to do. And again, Alison Grimes did not want to tell people that she voted for Obama. It's a fair question to ask. She doesn't have to answer it, or she can. But by not doing so, that was perceived by some as a sign of weakness. When what voters want is something bold. I'll tell you why that's true. Look at the GOP now. Trump doesn't make any sense at all. He's a racist, he's misogynist, he's anti-Muslim, he's a bigot. He's a bigot and a racist, and he hates women, and he's definitely against Muslims and definitely despises Muslims. So, but people are supporting him because he appeals to their racist instincts. He doesn't have any substance. He doesn't have any plan. He doesn't have any agenda. He is a racist, okay? And the only reason why polls say that people support him is because of that alone. There was something in Time magazine recently, and I'm speaking to you in January of 2017, which talked about evangelical voters will still support Trump even though he doesn't have faith or he lacks faith. Well, the question is, why will they still support him? Well, it's because, again, he's a racist, and these evangelical voters, a lot of these white evangelical voters, are freaking racist. They are racist to the core. In America, you know what they say? The most segregated time in America, the most segregated hour in America is the hour when you go to church on Sunday. Very segregated in this country. Right down the line, right down racial lines. So this idea that somehow you've got to be this kind of conservative changer, we just go by, and no. Our country is in tatters. It's become a banana republic. We do not have the infrastructure here. We've seen it with Hurricane Katrina under Bush. We've seen it before, and we're seeing it again, even under Obama, under a Republican governor in Michigan. Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis, or I say the genocide in Flint, under a Republican governor, poisoning the water, privatizing or trying to privatize the water system in Detroit and in Flint. And this is what you get. So there's this passion for a racist in the GOP. Now, if Alison Grimes and all those other candidates back in 2014 had expressed a passion for being a Democrat and a passion for progressivism in a country that is historically progressive and has historically had progressive movements for change, the ones I've mentioned, then she would have probably done very, very well in Kentucky. I'm not saying she definitely would have won, but I'm saying that Mitch McConnell would have been in the fight of his life in Kentucky for his Senate seat. I am telling you, it would have been a lot closer. And by the way, you can do the math on this. You can do the homework on this. Look this up too. All the candidates that ran away from Obama in the midterms in 2014, they all lost. Pretty much every single one of them lost. The ones who didn't want to be seen with him, didn't want to campaign. The White House even said that they weren't going to campaign, that Obama wasn't. And a lot of that was down to people didn't want him to come there and campaign with him, because supposedly he was unpopular, which is just nonsense. He got in on a landslide pretty much the second time and won convincingly the first. So how was he unpopular? That's all media speak. I mean, it's just nonsense. Mainstream media, it's nonsense. And then these Democrats, mealy-mouthed, weak Democrats, who are, as I call them, conservadems, the blue dogs, who don't have the guts, who want to maintain the corporate largesse. And no one's saying that corporations shouldn't exist. I'm not saying that. But what these guys do, they are shills for the corporate lobbyists and the corporate interest. So they're not aggressive enough. They do enough to get by, as I say. And she did the same. Didn't want to be seen with Obama. And I know Kentucky's in the South, southern state, but so what? Kentucky had a Democratic governor. Democratic governor, Steve Beshear, had a Medicare program there. Kentucky Connect, an Obamacare program. Kentucky Connect, successful. But you know what? They had a Democratic challenger because Beshear's term was up, and he ran against Matt Bevin, I believe is a Kentucky guy, and Bevin won in the midterm. I believe it was last year, actually, for governor, 2015. And again, weak campaigning by Democrats. Again, I can point to Scott Brown, 2010, weak campaigning against Scott Brown, the Republican, who came in and won the Senate seat in Massachusetts. Scott Brown. It was the first time in decades that a Republican won a Senate seat, the U.S. Senate seat in Massachusetts. The first time in forever. Ted Kennedy was the lion of the Senate. He passed away. And so that vacancy in 2010 was for Ted Kennedy's seat, which Kennedy had held for decades, for a long time. And Scott Brown won. Martha Coakley, the U.S. District Attorney, I believe, in Massachusetts, had run a very poor campaign. Again, a blue dog campaign, a lack of enthusiasm, just like Hillary Clinton right now, a lack of enthusiasm, very sedate enthusiasm. I'm not saying enthusiasm is not there at all for Hillary, because there's still a lot of it. But the passion is not there. It's an older electorate. Not every moment, but most of the people supporting Hillary are over 50. It's a sedate electorate. And they're going to come out, you know, they are. They're more conservative typically. They are. The people who are supporting Hillary as Democrats are typically more conservative. Typically, not all, but typically more conservative. They have families, or they are retirees, or they are business folks, or they are corporate people. People who are fairly well to do. That's not all of them. There are supporters that are young for Hillary too. I get that. But majority of them are rather conservative, and that's okay if they want. That's I'm not indicting that. I am just saying what is factual. That is, any number of research groups have done it. You can go look the numbers up, and these aren't partial. These are independent resources. I'm not talking about people who have it in for Hillary or who are pro Bernie people. I am talking about independent research being done. You know, that's a fact. It's a fact. It is. It's a fact. And all of these Democrats in 2014 who didn't have an agenda that said, let's go for it, let's really renew things, and just were very moderate, mealy-mouthed, middle-of-the-road-ish, wishy-washy Democrats, which has been the Democratic Party now for 30 years under the DLC, which is now defunct, and under the DNC, which is a conservative organization. And conservative, I mean in their mentality, not in their ideology. But they are corporate conservative Dems, conservadems, as I say. It's my word for them. And, those kinds of Democrats lost. They lost. Instead of touting the things that Obama did that were progressive, they ran away from them. Couldn't even say who they voted for in the general election, in the presidential election. She couldn't even say. And these guys were almost attacking Obama. Some of these Democratic candidates, they were all basically attacking the guy when he was in office for their campaigns. And what happened? They were out on their ass. And what you got was an influx of Republicans. So to those Hillary Clinton supporters that go, well, it's a different time, it's because the Congress is all Republican. Yeah. But why did it become all Republican? And how? And how did it become more Republican? Well, because your party, my party, the Democratic Party, was mealy-mouthed and ran these mealy-mouthed ass candidates who were all centrist, middle-of-the-roaders who basically barely wanted to acknowledge Obama's presence and barely wanted to embrace Obama or any part of the agenda that was progressive. And they were all out on their ass. They were all goners. Again, Alison Lundgren Grimes was not the only one. Mary Landrieu, out on her ass, gone. I can name a lot of men, but but those two women come to mind for me, and this is not about gender, but I remember them both because both of them ran away from Obama. And Mary Landrieu, very conservative Democrat, very conservative, very conservative. And she tried to survive politically by introducing a measure, hoping that would help save her, but it was too late. It was too late. It was either in late 2014 or early 2015, or whenever it was in the last year or two. Too late. She didn't survive. She didn't survive. Senate seat lost. Bye. I mean, that is the deal. And I think there was a runoff, and she lost. She lost. Recounts, runoff, whatever. She lost. Bye. And that is what happens. And I'm seeing it again right now. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. I've been around too long to know about how this works. I don't pretend that I know everything. Of course I don't. I don't pretend to lecture and lecture and lecture about how much I think I know about this. And yeah, it's going to sound like a lecture. I get it. And people don't like to be lectured to. I know that. No one does, including me. I'm simply saying that the Democratic Party, the DNC wing, is making huge mistakes. And I don't think for them it's a mistake. This is what they want by design. They want it nice and middle of the roady. Let me just move to the right enough so that I can keep my power. Let me incrementalize enough in a country amidst a history of progressivism. Let me move just a little to the right. I'm not going to embrace that progressive fervor. I'm going to just be incrementalist. And I'm telling you, that's what the party's become now over the last 30 years plus. 30 years or so. I'd say it started after. I'd say it started after Carter. I'd say in earnest, it really, really came on strong with President Bill Clinton, who did some excellent things and really appreciated that, because I directly benefited from that. I can tell you that from his presidency. I tell you, it was a booming time in that time. But there were also things like lots of other presidents that Bill Clinton did that really hurt America. Free trade, NAFTA, CAFTA, SHAFTA as it's called. It really helped to decimate a lot of the American workforce in terms of what corporations were doing, giving a lot of power to American corporations to do their trade overseas, as I talked about with China earlier, and allow companies to go offshore in great numbers under Clinton. Under Clinton. The Defense of Marriage Act. Who was that? Clinton. Three strikes, you're out. Who was that? Clinton. Things that decimated people in this country. Folks of color, by the way. Black folk, Latinos, etc., etc., etc. Crime bill. Those bills crippled people, threw them in jail for mandatory minimums. That's all under Bill Clinton, the husband of the current candidate. See, Dana Milbank, if you'd done your history and if you'd given people an overview, I know you only have so many column inches in which to do it. Or, words on the internet in which to do it. But if you had given people a little bit of an overview, maybe not quite as detailed as mine, but if you had done that, then your column would sound more informed than just a few spitballing opinions that don't make any kind of sense at all. And, people have to learn the history. And when you just give them your opinion and there's no information in it, it's just reactionary nonsense, then your ass is hanging out. Don't leave your ass hanging out, okay? These people who walk down the streets and their pants are right below their butts and you see everything in their behind exposed. I don't have to get graphic here. You know it. You know what I'm talking about. Don't leave your ass hanging out, buddy. And I'm talking to Dana Milbank. He has a right to his opinion. I have a right to mine. You have a right to yours. We don't have to agree. We can disagree without being disagreeable, as Dr. King once said. I'm just saying, come with the facts, not with some nonsense about how Bernie can't win. And quite frankly, if he said Hillary can't win, I would come at him the same way. I would have different arguments and I would use different reasoning than I'm obviously doing for Bernie, whom I support, full disclosure. But I would make a point the same way in terms of this idea that these really flimsy arguments and lines of argument don't make any sense. And really is just about shilling for a particular candidate. He could be shilling for the Republicans, or he could be shilling for Hillary. And in fact, if he wants to do either of those things, that's his prerogative. If he wants to shill for Bernie, that's his prerogative. But if he says anything wrong in any of those scenarios, I'm definitely going to critique it, or I'm going to praise it, depending on if he says something right or not. But this nonsense about how Bernie can't win, this kind of stuff is the meme that they threw at Obama. I've said this before. I've said it before to people on Twitter. I've said this many times. In 2008, same scenario. Clinton ran then. Hillary Clinton ran then. And the same argument was going around, is that Obama couldn't win. How did that turn out?